Okay, okay. Now we stream. Now we record. Hey, hi, hello. Welcome back, Alexandrian Codex. It's another Wiki 2 Mad Update the video. Woohoo! What do I have to talk about? Some pretty minor shit. Like I said, I'm mostly like dotting the I's, crossing the T's, finding busy work to do. One of those busy work things I did was I remembered that the Nolans in Louisiana actually, speak French still today, and culturally are quite distinct from the rest of Southern Dixie culture. So, and at this point, Louisiana had only been annexed for about 25 years. 1821, I think, is when the Louisiana Purchase was. So there are plenty of Francophiles down here who were slowly assimilating. It was only in 1830 that the non-French speaking population of New Orleans grew larger. The white French speaking population became the minority of white people. And this brought up a really interesting thing and conundrum. In census data at this time, people didn't list like what country they were from, like I'm German or my family's Dutch. No, they said white. Just like today they say Caucasian. Which isn't fucking helpful when I'm trying to show that there's immigrant populations here and elsewhere. So we've thrown some French people in Louisiana and Lake Charles. Not a lot, they're a minority, but they're a notable minority. They get assimilated within like the first 15 years. The reason of me doing this is from 1831 to 1840, French immigrants to the United States were the fourth most populous immigrant group. I didn't know that. The first is Irish, which is pretty common knowledge. Second is German. Third is British. Fourth is French. And then it dips down significantly. And those are European immigrant groups. Chinese becomes very noteworthy once the West Coast starts being opened up. So that's been introduced. I also added in a tiny French population up here in Saint Louis. And I looked into Detroit. No, sorry, Detroit. I don't know why I keep thinking Detroit is in Ohio. It definitely isn't. Detroit, but Detroit had been part of the United States long enough that it doesn't really have a French-speaking population as of this date. So that's a small change. I made some changes to the political parties of the United States. And for this, we get to look at Paul Drive. I totally forget what I named this. I named it parties. Yeah, Alex, that's a good word. You'll definitely remember that later on. Parties. So as is in HPM, they did an okay job with the political parties, but I've made it a bit more linear, fucked around with the values a little bit. Let's go top to bottom. Communist has not changed at all. Communist Party of the United States of America, we're turning the vibes back on because the silence is weirding me out. Still founded in 1898. Still pretty much same values. Planned economy, protectionist, pro-atheist, full citizenship, and pro-war is maybe not the right thing, but it leans into this idea that Marxist-Leninist dictatorship of the proletariat would export the revolution by force, which is possible. Fascist. I don't think I fucked with this at all. Still, Silver Legion of America, founded in 1914, or available after the end of the First World War, or beginning of the First World War, I should say. State capitalist, protectionist, moralist, resident, jingoist. Conservatives, I played around with a little bit. You start out in Victoria 2, typically, even in HPM, with Democrats as your conservative faction. Well, I want to make a difference, noting this transition between the Jacksonian Democrats and the more modern, well, late modern Democratic Party. Essentially, under Jackson, the Democrats were really focused more on laissez-faire and fair trade, but also very jingoistic, all about expanding the United States. Then 1854 hits, really, the 1850s hit, and the big political debate of the United States stops being if the United States should expand or do manifest destiny, but it starts being about slavery. And that becomes the great debate of the period. So it's a de-emphasis on jingoism, just pro-military at that point. Then, after the outbreak of the American Civil War, anti-militarist values were really the attitude. Not that Americans didn't want to intervene overseas for business interests. Oh god, we did plenty of that. But the United States, not until like 1898, didn't become pro-war. And in 1898, it was only because it was popularized with the sinking of the USS Maine that the United States had been attacked by the Spanish first. And like even the First World War, this splendid isolationism of the United States is why I'm ending up with anti. Even in 1936, the United States was still pretty isolationist. So jingoism and warhawkism really started going out the window after the American Civil War, which makes sense. You might be a little disillusioned after losing a couple of generations to that kind of violence. Louisiana Purchase is 1803. You're right. What was I thinking of in 1821? I don't remember. What? Google 1821 American history. What happened in 1821? Missouri is admitted to the United States. Norfolk and Long Island hurricane strikes New York City. Amherst College is founded. Santa Fe Trail is used by the first white American. Oh, now that's ringing a bell. Socialism still starts out as the International Working Men's Association. The IWA, or IWW, as it would eventually become, in part, was an internationalist organization. So, that ain't right. There, that's right. The first Socialist Party, available in 1864, becomes, it's a free trade emphasis, because protectionism, tariff, all that is pretty anti-internationalist, and the working men parties of that time, the first Internationale, were about international cooperation between socialist movements. Eventually, nationalism would sink in a little bit more, and the Socialist Labor Party of America would pop up in 1876. Then the Socialist Party of America would pop up in 1901, and those are pretty much identical. There's some notable differences that aren't worth getting into right now. It's a really interesting history. The splits of the American socialist movements in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and why, and all the weird pieces that went into that, and just reading about it, especially the interaction of the anarchists with the socialist movement in the early 20th century, late 19th century, just is a mirror image of today. And if you're an anarchist, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. Anarchists basically come in being like, you're not being radical enough, we gotta do something different. And then don't suggest anything materially impactful, or don't suggest anything that really builds a movement or builds an organization. It's all just like flash in the pan kind of actions. So the socialists and materialists and the communists are like, well, this isn't actually changing lived conditions or building anything, so we don't really want to work with you anymore. The anarchists are like, yeah, you're not doing enough, we don't want to work with you. God, it's just time is a flat fucking circle. Nothing ever changes. Leftist infighting is the only constant. Let me say, you know, you're an anarchist, you are my comrade, I love you, but also, like, you are fucking exhausting. Liberal. Start out with the Whig Party in being founded in 1833. The Whig Party is really on its way out. In the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, Whigs were, prior to the slavery debate, really predicated on anti-war and pro-tariff were their big platforms, whereas the conservatives were pro-war and anti-tariff. The United States parties in the 19th century were really single-issue parties for a long, long time, and would rise and fall depending on those single issues. I've excluded the anti-Mason party who was a single issue party, just all about fucking hating those Freemasons. That's it. That's their only policy. They were convinced that there was a Freemason conspiracy to take over the United States and control it through like some kind of Illuminati bullshit. And that's all they cared about. They got nothing done. It's amazing to read about. Absolutely amazing garbage. So the Whigs fail at the anti-war thing. They're pretty unpopular because of that, because Manifest Destiny was actually quite popular at the time. Then the Whigs really fall apart trying to find a backbone to stand up against slavery in the South and fail to do so. The Republican Party split off from the Democrat Party, which were the Republican Democrats at the time. Republicans were mostly Northern Democrats who opposed slavery. So the Republican Party starts out pro-war, just like their old Democrat selves, but focusing on full citizenship, i.e. abolition of slavery or equal votes for everyone, and possibly enforcing that by force on the South. Following the outbreak of the Civil War, they focus on anti-war, but still full rights and citizenship. Nothing too surprising. Reactionary, this has changed somewhat significantly. By design of Victoria II, reactionists are state capitalist, protectionist, moralist, because it uses a European model of reactionaryism, or reactionism, which at the time was anti-liberalism, primarily. Wanting to undo or mitigate liberal reforms, expanding the vote, democratizing, republicanizing, things like that. So it's a little weird in the United States to have, especially the Southern Democrats, be portrayed as wanting to strip away the right to vote, because that's not what Southern Democrats were about. They were about restricting, expanding that. They were more just very conservative, more than they were reactionary. They hated tariffs, hated taxes, were jingoist as hell, and really didn't want to abolish slavery, and even if after it had been abolished, they wanted to turn that back. So that's basically what the Southern Democrats are here. The Nullifier Party was based primarily out of South Carolina during the Jackson administration. It was mostly an anti-Jacksonian party that was all about fuck you, fuck your tariffs, you can't tell South Carolina what to do. But it is your reactionary party at the beginning of the game, because the reactionary loyalty built in at the beginning of the game was based off of Nullifier Party popularity in regions in 1836. So all that said, yeah, that's been the changes. Have there been a few others? Let's check the notes, because I honestly don't remember. It's been a couple of days of sporadic work. It's mixed into here. Not that this is... I even have a note here saying Louisiana Purchase 1803. I have no idea why I said 1821. Nope, that's about it. Next up is changing ship and unit name generation to fit the actual names of United States ships. Now, I'm going to put in a cut here for YouTube. What I'm going to do for Twitch is we're just going to play on speed 5 for a little while. We're going to make sure this is mostly working, and the parties are at least behaving rationally up to 1850. And they will be, but, you know, I'm just doing my due diligence. So if you're watching on, I almost said Twitch, YouTube, this is it for today. Until maybe tomorrow, maybe a week from now, maybe a year from now. I'm going to say, toodaloo, take care. I will see you then. Bye-bye.